Welcome to the Beat. I am Ari Melber, and it is Friday. In many ways, after the week America and the markets have had, many people could be ready for moving forward into weekend activities. We do have a lot of big news tonight, some special guests, and something fun by the end of the hour. The top story here involves several legal touch points. First, I can tell you the legal news this evening. The judge here in that very controversial case is ruling with the Trump administration that a Columbia University student, Mahmoud Khalil, who was detained last month, can actually now be deported. And this is unusual. It is also how the rule of law works. Sometimes people have strong feelings or disagreement with government actions, but here it is judges overseeing them. They just say that they think it is valid that the administration cited what is an obscure immigration provision that does give the Secretary of State the authority to do individual deportations. Mind you, this wouldn't work on a massive scale because it's case by case, but the Trump administration, through this process, basically has allegations which we are referring to. This has not yet been fully litigated or at all proven in court. But the Trump administration is saying this individual led activities that they view as, quote, aligned to Hamas. I can tell you as well that the lawyers on the defense side deny that. And they say there's not much evidence they're aware of that could go anywhere close to that. Now, when you talk about free speech and political activities, we do know this immigrant student was organizing pro-Palestinian protests on campus, which of course is something people are allowed to do in the United States. You can organize protests about all kinds of things peacefully. The ruling comes from the conservative Fifth Circuit, which is based in New Orleans. That's also where the detention centers are held. The Post reports it's also widely considered the nation's most conservative circuit. So there you have what lawyers sometimes call the nexus, the jurisdiction where the thing being challenged is occurring in a place, and that's the place where the judges are ruling. You will also notice there's been a lot of reporting on this, allegations that the administration has tried to distort or what lawyers call forum shop that process by putting people in places where they think they can have more friendly judges to the Trump administration. Now, Khalil's lawyers emphasize that he is, under current status, a legal permanent resident. In other words, their argument against this is that he is allowed to be here, and the government has not yet met the burden, they argue, of proving why that permanent resident status should be destroyed. And if there is a link to terrorism, which of course is a big deal, and many people would say if you can actually prove that in court, not about protest or speech, but you actually have evidence that someone's a member of a foreign terrorist group, well, much of this controversy would then dissipate. That certainly has not yet been proven. It's been asserted. Now, this comes amidst the escalation in the legal battles over Abrego Garcia, which was a big breaking story. If you happen to be watching the news late last night and this hour, going into the end of our 6 p.m. hour on the East Coast, we got a Supreme Court decision on that. Now, he's the father who was living in Maryland, and the Supreme Court ruled against the Trump administration. There's no doubt that he was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. That is to say, the country he was sent to was not where he was allowed to go under U.S. law. I'm simplifying. We can get into all the details, but bottom line, he wasn't supposed to go there. The judges said that, and the Trump administration admitted that part was an error. We got this ruling last night where the Supreme Court unanimously ordered the Trump administration to facilitate his release, to get him back to the U.S. or out of El Salvador. A district judge is pursuing this case with requested daily updates from the Trump administration on the steps they're taking to do this. And that touches on a point we actually discussed when we were covering this breaking story last night. The court saying you got to do it to the extent possible is different than a government actually doing everything possible to enact it. So the district judge is saying, hey, you better comply. The Trump administration allegedly defying the earlier order about detailed information on Garcia's location and how he would be brought back. Indeed, the Trump administration had claimed that the earlier such requests were inconsistent with the Supreme Court directive. And the district judge, again, this is the clash we're seeing, is saying, no, you're misconstruing the Supreme Court's order. Nothing could be further from the truth. And saying it's wholly illegal from the moment it happened that they sent this individual Garcia to the wrong place. Now, there is this photo where people believe this is that individual held by guards in the El Salvador prison. You can see in that flash image some sense of what this individual is going through. And again, we deal in evidence here. Courts deal with all kinds of allegations of misconduct, mistake, abuse. Courts also deal with allegations of violence or murder. But what you see here, remember, is a person that the administration admits shouldn't be where he is, treated like this in a foreign prison. They don't even contest that. And now, as of last night, the Supreme Court unanimously saying, fix it. Garcia's attorney is saying the Trump administration has already, quote, flouted the prior court orders, and it's another stunning display of both arrogance and cruelty. Now, we have covered this every way we can, and I've told you we will have on all people involved within reason and with fact-checking to understand what's happening. Indeed, we had a Trump DHS veteran on the show recently discuss this very case. And now we have Garcia's lawyer speaking out today on MSNBC. Let's listen to that.
There's no one in this country who actually believes that it's true that the United States of America is powerless over the government of El Salvador, over this particular facility. We put Kristi Noem inside the walls of that prison, and we got her out, right? So why can't we get Kilmar Abrego Garcia out?
Bottom line, the point there is this powerful government, which did this thing recently, made this mistake that they don't even deny in the Trump administration, can obviously quickly fix it. That is the Garcia lawyer's view. And remember, the Supreme Court, which might disagree about many things involving Trump, came down unanimously 9-0 yesterday, or with no dissents is how we put it, because it was an unsigned order, with the Chief Justice writing for the court. But the whole court says you got to fix this. And so the real touch point here that we're going to be watching in the days ahead is whether the administration figures out a way to do that. There's a lot of evidence they have the power to do so, or they play these sort of games with someone's life, even after admitting they sent him to the wrong place. There's also a probe into the deportations that has revealed other information. CBS journalists at 60 Minutes exposing how most of those deported to El Salvador, according to at least their information, that is to say, public records, have no apparent criminal records. That includes a 31-year-old, Andre Hernandez Romero, who was a makeup artist from Venezuela who sought asylum in the U.S. His attorney says they are concerned that maybe he was targeted for being gay or his political views, but either way, they say there is no public evidence that would link him to the kind of gangs that were being justified as a reason to use the wartime powers if you take the leap to say that we're at war, even though Congress hasn't declared one, and the gangs are making an invasion. Even if you go all the way down that road, which the Supreme Court has not ruled on yet, whether that's even a valid argument, they still say it wouldn't apply to him because, as you see now, him in this prison photo, having his what appears to be his head shaved from Time Magazine, they say he shouldn't be in the prison even if you accepted those other gang invasion arguments. And his lawyer emphasizes no criminal record in the U.S. or his home country of Venezuela.
It's horrifying to see someone who we've met and know as a sweet, funny artist in the most horrible conditions I could imagine.
You fear for Andre's safety in there.
Absolutely. We have grave concerns about whether he can survive.
This is the reality for those individuals. California Governor Newsom sending a letter to Trump this week asking them to fix these things, to bring these people back. So when you take this all together tonight, in a week where we have seen all kinds of mistakes, reversals, and incompetence by the Trump administration on matters that clearly affect tens or hundreds of millions of Americans' lives in the markets, you see that level of mistake or incompetence, or worse, as some have argued, you get an idea about what this governing is like. Then you take folks like this, who are literally quite disappeared, so harder for people to learn about them. Not a week where everyone was in the country thinking about all these other immigration issues with the problems, the self-induced market problems. But you take it all together, and what you have is something that is either deeply and stubbornly incompetent when you admit you send the wrong person to a foreign prison and don't just try to fix it immediately, or worse, a type of cruelty, which we have seen alleged in other Trump administration activities. Now, I'm not saying it's one or the other to be sort of vague. Incompetence and mistakes are a big part of how this administration has been running in these first 75 or so days. That's not a secret. So some of it might be incompetence, just like we've seen in other areas. The cruelty, though, targeting certain types of immigrants associated with certain views, slapping the label gang on everyone as a legal and political activity, it would seem, to try to diminish them, to try to say they don't get human rights. This is a big part of what's happening amidst all these other things that are, quote, flooding the zone, as the Trump folks sometimes say, and it's very important, and it affects all of us. And as I've told you, and we had a historian last night on the show reminding everyone, If you think that they start with this weak group and it stops there, history shows when human rights are sacrificed for some, that then is spread to wider and wider groups. It's all about the rule of law fundamentally. And by the way, we had an election with many issues, including inflation, that hurt the Democrats, according to a lot of evidence. But the Democrats also did campaign a lot on rule of law. Maybe they didn't explain it well enough. Maybe people were distracted by other issues. But we are seeing tonight how rule of law is not some abstract concept. Then you look on the home front, where executive powers are also being abused to target American citizens, lawyers who represent all kinds of individuals, universities where so many people send their children to learn to grow up and don't expect it to become a completely government-run, big government, anti-libertarian, political correct screening, which is part of what we're seeing from the sort of right-wing PC police, and attacks on public officials tonight. There's an interim U.S. attorney, a prosecutor, who is Trump's former personal lawyer, very politically, personally, legally loyal to him, Alina Habba. And listen to what she said on Fox News about potentially abusing police and investigative powers against elected Democrats.
I am unfortunately going to announce on your show tonight, Sean, and I want it to be a warning for everybody, that I have instructed my office today to open an investigation into Governor Murphy, to open an investigation into Attorney General Platkin.
The Immigrant Trust Directive is settled law. It's been upheld by judges appointed by President Trump. I don't typically launch investigations on cable news networks. I'm focused on doing my job, which is to keep the residents of our state safe. The interim U.S. attorney, she hasn't been there that long. She said publicly she wants to politicize the office. I hope she starts doing her job.
There you have the Trump prosecutor, who actually has a lot of these powers, and the state's top attorney general responding to this idea that he and other Democratic officials should be investigated based on policy differences over immigration. It's happening. Remember when people said, well, if he gets into office, will there be retribution cases? Here's a big one. Maybe they didn't go after Jack Smith yet, or some of the other big names that people have wondered about. Maybe the governor of New Jersey is the type of official that is what I've been telling you about, is the softer target than a super famous national figure. But that is very clearly an announcement of a political probe of people in the Democratic Party without any stated potential crime. Now, I'm saying that as a lawyer and legal reporter, chief legal correspondent here. I'm not saying that as some political observation. Obviously, we've reported on people, including in New Jersey, like Menendez, who faced real evidence of a crime and then a conviction by a jury. This is the opposite, and I'll show you why. The only thing that Trump official mentioned as a predicate, a reason to open this case, was that New Jersey has this sometimes called sanctuary policy. An appeals court in the federal government has already ruled that's okay, that state and local police can have, at a state level of decision-making, a policy where they don't participate in federal immigration enforcement operations. That was upheld by the Third Circuit, as you see there, in 2021. So there isn't a broken law to refer to, and I guess she isn't maybe brainstorming enough or creative enough or didn't want to sort of commit defamation and just make one up. So she's saying that's the immigration thing, which has been upheld. Trump also going after the colleges, over a dozen universities, Columbia making concessions, and it's facing what they call a consent decree, an effort by the federal government to have constant oversight. That is usually used in cases like local police department or civil authorities who violated civil rights. Now, I guess it's being used against universities for having trouble managing protests or other things that aren't usually considered that level. Big law firms are under attack from Trump, basically because they've represented clients that he opposes. Some are fighting, others making deals. He views it as a payoff.
We have a lot of law firms that have paid me a lot of money in the form of legal fees. They paid $100 million a firm on average. Hopefully I won't need that many legal fees or that much. I may. Who knows? After it ends, after we leave, maybe I'll need it. But if I do, it's not going to be very pleasant.
More threats from the president there. Sussman Godfrey is a firm that is fighting back, and some firms think they can prove that this is illegal, make the sort of shakedown orders go away. If that name rings a bell, they represented a huge, huge case, Dominion, over the Trump-related election lies, and won one of the biggest defamation suits ever. We had one of their attorneys on before.
I think it is a ringing endorsement for accountability. I think it sends a message that if you told these lies about the election, that there is accountability. And ultimately, that's what it's all about. Again, we're going to have misinformation, but I think what this is establishing is that there will be consequences to lying.
There were consequences. It was a Trump-related case, and now he's trying to use the awesome federal powers of the presidency to punish these firms. WilmerHale is fighting Trump in court over this. And interestingly, they're a law firm with a pedigree here. They fought Senator McCarthy's Republican Red Scare more than 75 years ago. The tactics, unfortunately, are similar. It was a WilmerHale lawyer, indeed, who famously challenged the red-baiting McCarthy to his face.
Senator, what you've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
Have you no sense of decency? The parallels are true. The lessons write themselves. The people who fought and fought early were helping. The people who folded early, they weren't just scared, they were part of the problem. Joyce Vance is here with me. We're going to get into this in 90 seconds.
Senator, what you've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of...
Former prosecutor Joyce Vance joins us. Your thoughts on all of this tonight?
Well, you know, that moment that you've just played for your viewers, that's the moment where the fever dream broke during the McCarthy era. The question I think we're all asking ourselves this week, watching event after event after event, is will the fever dream ever break, right? We're already watching today an administration that's in open defiance of a court order, a judge who said, update me on the status of this man who you have conceded you unlawfully deported. And the government responded, oh, Judge, it's not convenient for us to do that. So I think we really are at this moment. I mean, we've watched this progressively, Ari. There's been the debate about, are we in a constitutional crisis? And the answer to that question is now very clear. We are in a full-blown confrontation between this White House and the courts. And the question is, do the courts have the serious level of teeth, of enforcement ability? At some point, will they step in and tell the White House, we said it and we mean it?
Right. And that comes in a case where, while immigration powers are broad, the Supreme Court definitively ruled against at least the mistaken deportation part of this yesterday. I showed this Trump prosecutor who used to be his personal lawyer announcing what they say is a probe of a Democratic official with apparently no predicate. Do you see the stated reason for that probe of the Democratic governor? Do you see that as valid? Would that open a case when you were a U.S. attorney?
You know, it's not valid. It's not close to valid. You have to believe that a crime has been committed to open an investigation. It's a very low bar, but it's not no bar. And coming in the not too distant future is this hurdle, the federal principles of prosecution, that says prosecutors can't indict a case if they lack sufficient evidence to obtain or sustain a conviction. Those aren't just words written on paper, because prosecutors face judges and juries, and cases without evidence, even if the president wants to see them prosecuted, they don't succeed. So here's what's happening in the District of New Jersey, a federal district with a storied past, a district that's prosecuted public corruption cases, but has also gone out of its way to protect its citizens from violent crime, from civil rights violation, from other legitimate federal crimes. Now we have someone who is embarking on revenge prosecutions. And that doesn't end well, because whether you're the attorney general or the governor in New Jersey, you know that you're going to be able to bring a successful defense of selective and vindictive prosecution. But what we see before these investigations get to that stage is the use of federal investigative procedures to harass people for no reason other than the fact that the President of the United States has decided to abuse his power so he can make a point with people that he doesn't like.
And briefly, when we look at federalism meaning something, that states have their own independent power, are there other measures they can take if they think this is politicized or even potentially, as you said, unlawful selective prosecutorial harassment?
They can certainly appeal to the court of public opinion, and they should. But the problem is we're not living through a normal administration where internal offices in the Justice Department would pump the brakes and say, you can't do this. There's no predication for this investigation. Ultimately, that will be up to the courts if this even proceeds to an indictment, which seems enormously unlikely to me.
Understood. Joyce Vance, thank you. Have a great weekend. We have deepening fears coming up tonight on the ongoing trade war problem and scrutiny on MAGA enablers who still want to somehow appease Trump instead of telling the truth about the markets. It's been a wild week in the markets and economy, and Trump's tariffs continue to stoke chaos and uncertainty, retaliation from China, recession fears. We're up over 100% tariffs coming back from China. It's been quite the week.
A roller coaster week on Wall Street.
So President Trump's trade war is sending markets on a wild ride this week.
United States post-World War II was a global stabilizer. We are the global destabilizer.
We're living in crazy town right now, and the markets are swinging wildly.
There will be a 90-day pause on the reciprocal tariffs.
Let's be clear what happened. Who capitulated here and why? It is the White House who capitulated.
We don't know what comes after the 90 days. Trump doesn't know what comes after the 90 days. Businesses certainly don't know.
I don't know. I don't know. You know what? That's what I've heard a lot last week. I don't know.
What a wild week it has been.
A wild week, a lot of I don't knows, because if the people in charge don't know, then very few other people can know anything. The top 500 companies down over 10% since Trump came into office. The Dow, 9%. And yet, many of Trump's enablers are trying to sell failure as a win. Headlines on Fox, Trump outsmarts the PhDs, victory. He's thinking 3 steps ahead. Why 3? Call it 6. Just wake us when something actually works. Inside the White House, we still have evidence and information. In fact, there's a lot of hardworking journalists at all kinds of outlets, from the Times to the Post to this Yahoo story, about the Kremlin-esque praise of Trump in a meeting that might have as well been held in Moscow.
What you're doing now, I think, is a great service to our country, but ultimately to the world. And I want to congratulate you and your team that's working on that, because that has extraordinary geopolitical implications.
Mr. President, on behalf of America's manufacturers, I want to thank you for standing up to the Chinese Communist Party and fighting for our main streets, for our workers.
What you have assembled in your vision is a turning point and an inflection point in American history. And so just being a part of that is the greatest honor. So thank you for that.
It is really striking, and the point is not whether this feels embarrassing or obviously false or the tone. The point is this is part of the feedback loop which is affecting Americans because of broken and incompetent policy in the United States government, in the White House. You can go back to Scarface, or as the great Biggie Smalls put it in the 10 Crack Commandments, never get high on your own supply. And the president is basically veering and zigzagging back and forth to meetings like that, where he thinks, hey, we got this under control, and then much more painful measures like the stock and bond markets telling him, no, everyone is panicked for a horribly mistaken policy. Here's some reporting that Trump privately acknowledged his trade policy could trigger a recession, but he wanted to avoid a depression. So with that in mind, you have this extreme praise also coming from lawmakers who are supposed to know better.
We've never had a genius in terms of an entrepreneur in office before like this.
In terms of what the president is doing, this is going to be the biggest deal any president has ever closed since the Louisiana Purchase under Thomas Jefferson.
To quote Donald Trump himself, don't believe what your eyes are telling you. Don't believe what they're saying. In this case, because they are spinning to him, even as the markets and a lot of private reporting indicates the opposite about this flailing trade war. Michelle Norris is here on all of this next.
When your staff goes that over the top with praise, that's how you know you up. I mean, they're clearly overcompensating. They sound like Hollywood agents after a giant flop. You crushed it. You killed it.
MSNBC editor Michelle Norris joins us. We look back at some of this. You can laugh at it. Some of it's echoing the first term, but the almost absurdist praise comes at a time where Trump needs facts about his tariff impact more than ever.
Good to be with you, Ari. I don't think that room was a place where they were interested in facts. I think they were more interested in spin. And you saw that in the way that they were praising him, the way that they're taking a week where a lot of people were feeling a lot of uncertainty and pain and instability, and instead using that as an opportunity to tell the sitting president that he's doing a great job, that this will produce perhaps short-term pain, that everyone who is feeling some uncertainty about this just, doesn't understand that he has a bigger, grander, bolder plan that it's all going to work out in the end. They told him what he wanted to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's what we saw on Fox. Take a look.
Those 401k people who are depending, those retirees, all of that, just talking plain speak with them. Look, when this nation used to go to war, people in this country would support the war effort with their materials at home and making things for weaponry and all of that. We got to do 100% buy-in over this bumpy period.
Michelle, it's rare that you have. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think we need to concede, though, that some of that rhetoric is actually effective. She was talking there about victory gardens and people doing things to make sacrifices during World War II. And when Trump repeatedly talks about America getting ripped off, I spent the week talking to Trump supporters in places like Colorado and Wisconsin, and a lot of them actually buy into that sort of patriotism. And they believe in the idea that manufacturing should come back to the United States. Unfortunately, even though that message lands well with voters, it's going to be very difficult to rev that engine back up in this America. It's almost like he's fighting a trade war with, the idea of this building some sort of manufacturing might based on an idea that's come and gone. It's going to be very difficult to bring manufacturing back to the United States for all kinds of reasons. And even if we were to do this, the average factory takes 2 to 3 years to build and then another 2 to 3 years to become efficient.
Yeah, he hasn't announced anything like that. Right. I mean, these are these sort of sane-washing hypothetical conversations that are being had as if there was such a strategy. Right. I mean, you also could pass a bill in Congress if you wanted to work with Congress. Republicans are in control to use the grand powers of the federal government. Right. Like has been done with other work programs to subsidize domestic manufacturing. I mean, infrastructure week. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to do it if we were serious, but it's hard to pretend, and Paul Krugman, the economist, was walking us through this just last night. It's hard to pretend that this hasn't done the opposite. It's not only not brought back manufacturing yet, no country's cut a deal with Trump. He just backed down. But it seems to make some of that less likely because of the levels of the uncertainty.
Exactly. I mean, no country would cut a deal because of the uncertainty. It's hard to imagine an American company that would make the kind of investment that you would need to make to rev up that manufacturing machine right now, because we have tariffs. They're on, it's off. We're not sure what happens. There's a 90-day reprieve. There's so much uncertainty that it's hard to imagine someone doing this. I mean, this tariff policy is it is almost like setting off a bomb in your own home and hoping that the blast radius reaches all the way across the Pacific and hits China in some way that will force them to come to the table and negotiate. And China seems to be not at all fazed by this saber rattling. They're quite confident they can pivot and find other places to sell their goods and services. They have manufacturing might that we cannot match. It doesn't feel good to say this, but it happens to be true. And they also, as a country, are probably much more accustomed to austerity. than we are here in the United States. And so they seem to hold, if not all the cards, a lot of the cards in this negotiating strategy.
I think you make a fair point, and they have this long-term time horizon that administrations in this country don't have, even though Trump has talked about illegally trying to hold on to power past 2029. But in fact, that is not supposed to happen, and China can wait him out at the tune of 100+% if they need to.
Yes, they can. And the other interesting thing, Ari, is that we have alienated. We are, negotiating with several countries, he says. We have enacted 25% tariffs on our North American allies in Mexico and Canada. It would be so much better if we were going forward as a united force with our allies. And instead, we have alienated the people that we should be negotiating along with in trying to work with China. So for many Americans, they may not understand this yet. They may not feel it. The tariffs have not really hit. But when you go to the store to buy everything from contact lenses to tennis shoes to toothpaste, I invite everyone to spend some time this weekend just looking at the backside of the products in your house and see how many of them say made in China. And we have a sense of, how ubiquitous it is. But when you really start to pay attention to it, you realize that this is going to impact every part of your life. And people may not feel it, but they will soon.
Yeah, and it's about results. It's not some grand hypothetical. It's about the results of, do you save people money, or are they paying more? Does it operate like a tax? If you define a tax as the government choosing to do something that costs you a bunch of money that you have no control of, so you have to pay the tax. That's sort of the bottom line of why the Wall Street Journal and other conservatives are warning that Trump has become one of the biggest taxers ever. Michele Norris, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. We have some fun stuff, including a David Bowie reference by the end of the hour. But first, some of these cuts that could affect cruise ships. We'll explain.
You propose more than $11 billion in cuts to local and state programs addressing things like infectious disease, mental health, addiction, and childhood vaccination. Did you personally approve those cuts?
I'm not familiar with those cuts.
RFK is the head of the agency, but that doesn't mean he knows what's going on. Says he's, quote, not familiar with the billions of dollars in cuts to key programs in the department that he just took over. That includes headlines like this: CDC laying off cruise ship inspectors. It's going to affect the safety of Americans and others who are on those ships, including in international waters. Staff also were in the middle of responding to 2 norovirus outbreaks when they were fired. And there's been a surge of health issues already on these cruise ships.
Dozens of passengers on a cruise out of Tampa recovering after an outbreak of an illness.
For the second time this week, there is an outbreak making people sick on a cruise ship from Florida.
More than 240 people on board a Cunard luxury cruise ship have gotten sick with norovirus.
These poor travelers, right? They were just trying to sip on some pina coladas, take in the sun, and now they are dealing with norovirus.
The rate of these outbreaks is much higher this year, a dozen so far, compared to 18 in all of last year. So a dozen in 4 months versus 18 across all 12. I mentioned David Bowie earlier in the hour. We'll explain how we end the week on that note next. We're living through a big time for music, from artists like Taylor and Beyonce redefining global touring to Kendrick Lamar showing the world how rap battles work on the Super Bowl stage. But keep in mind, these artists are actually aged about 35 to 43. Many of them are 20 years out from their debuts, while the new stars are coming up now as teens. Chappell Roan, Olivia Rodrigo, and 22-year-old Memphis artist NLE Choppa, who's tapped the internet to get his music going viral as young as when he was 16 years old. Now he's hit 10 billion streams. That's more than many artists twice his age, with a platinum single going #1 on Billboard's Emerging Artist chart, and songs with major rappers like Young Thug and Roddy Ricch.
Never send a threat on the internet just to prove a point. Evaluate the mistake and just wait on your breakthrough. Off you clove, I turned over a new leaf. Sherlock Holmes gonna have to come see how you gonna solve this mystery.
And NLE Choppa joins us now. His new song is 444. He's making an acting debut in the new film Black Heat. And from Tennessee to New York, it's his Beat debut. Welcome, man.
Thank you for having me.
How you doing?
Blessed. Highly favored. Can't complain.
Amazing. I was just telling you when you sat down, and we keep it real, so we'll start there. I got first put onto you with Walk 'Em Down.
Yeah, man.
Which is really catchy.
Yes,
a tough song, obviously.
Yes, sir.
What songs helped you feel like you were breaking through, or people not just in your circle were like, oh, I heard that one?
Shadow Flow was the first one for sure. Like it was the one that gained more territory for me for sure. Walk 'Em Down for sure was like the next one that I felt like it put me in another bracket.
We took a look. Maybe you've seen some of this, but people are feeling you on TikTok.
A lot.
Yeah, right?
A lot.
All right, let's take a look.
I got the big head on the hole like Stewie. He's like, I got the nigga like Stewie, yo. And he just this blue-faced girl, but yo, he's snapping.
What does it feel like for you to have that in real time? Used to be people worked up, then they tour, then they get to bigger venues, you see the people.
Yeah.
Now, someone in your generation, you might be seeing people online reacting to you the same week you drop the song.
Yeah. It's like the difference between instant gratification and delayed. Rather, it's like if I'm getting a plaque on it instantly, if I'm getting reactions on it instantly, or if it's just doing what it needs to do streaming-wise instantly. And sometimes I feel like as artists in this generation, I feel like I take for granted how instantly gratified things are.
Your creative process, right? Because you could put it all out fast, or you could kind of slow down and think through your approach. Yeah.
So I feel like, it's songs that I make to where I listen to it and I'm like, I'm too ahead of my time with it. So I let it marinate. I literally have songs that I dropped this year that was literally like 3 to 4 years old.
Oh, really?
Because I knew like in a moment, if I was to drop that song, probably my fan base or my fans wouldn't understand and be able to grasp the growth. But now as I'm growing as an artist, I'm maturing, I'm feeling the shoes of my songs more to where I can release them now, and it makes more sense.
Well, you know what Kanye said?
He says a lot.
He does say a lot. He said, I'm living in the future, so the present is my past.
Yeah, 1000%. And sometimes I feel like, we're living in the future. We also have to stay in tune of what's going around us for the now.
It seems like there's multiple sides, or sometimes they call that a duality, right?
Yeah.
We see tough, and you're talking about street code, right?
Yeah.
But then you're also talking about the church and being a parent.
Yeah.
Tell me about any of that. What are you saying, and do you feel like you're occupying almost a different person or a different part of your personality in different songs?
I feel like I am everything. I feel like I feel everything on a spiritual level, physical level, mental level. With me being a reflection of everything that's going on, it's kind of hard to, dim light on certain feelings or certain moods. Also, too, I got this thing that I always tell myself is like, I am an artist. I'm not a contradiction. So like, with me being Bryson Potts, I know that NLE Choppa has the free will to paint whatever picture he wants to paint.
A lot of folks remember David Bowie had Ziggy Stardust, and he had more makeup and he had different color hair. That was decades ago.
Yeah.
But the idea was, well, Ziggy, right? It's this other thing. So tell me more about that. Is that something that you found through other artists and looking at other rappers, or you found that yourself of, wait, is it what you just said? I can be something different when I'm NLE.
I think it came with just experience. It came with me learning what balance was. I feel like for a certain period of time, who NLE Choppa was like a raw and uncut version of me not trying to filter much of anything, with me just relying off how I felt, going off my emotions, and like putting it in a booth and really wanting to like live it wholeheartedly, be about it wholeheartedly and all those things. But I realized, like, first and foremost, we're in the entertainment business. So I was bringing what was personally going on, what was personally bothering me, and I was wearing it on my sleeve as NLE Choppa instead of taking a bullet as Bryson and letting NLE Choppa just be great from an artist standpoint.
So should I say goodbye to NLE or Bryson?
I think today you got a good blend of both.
Okay.
So whoever you want to talk to.
You know what? I'll say NLE and Bryson. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
NLE Choppa. Love that and learning about all that. And speaking of TikTok, we're on there at Ari Melber. You can find us, and we share some things you might not even see on the show. Ain't no regular chocolate. It's the good stuff. Election night in America, that can only mean one thing. The legend at the map, Steve Kornacki.
You know, I'm a diva, honey. And that's what we do.
Here we are trucking. This is what it looks like when we do a news show from the road.
Adrenaline's pumping. I was the relief pitcher today for Nicole. Got called in.
You seem great, but I'd be more happy if this was our viewer right here. Facci. We're in Brooklyn?
Yeah, we're in Brooklyn.
And if it's Friday, you know it's
time to fall back.
Hey. Shout out to the postal workers. If it's Friday, it's time to fall back. We were falling back there with NLE Choppa, learning about his life and career. And if you want to keep up with us, tomorrow, Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern, we have The Beat Weekend. I promise you, it is our special Saturday edition with stuff you might not have seen and some other special extras depending on the weekend. So I invite you to check that out. That does it for us. Have a great weekend. Thanks for watching The Beat with Ari Melber.